I'd like to introduce our two speakers for today, Skylar Rogers, Senior Manager at Kazoo, and Tiffany Skolnick, Senior Customer Success Manager, also with Kazoo. As a Senior Manager, Skylar has spent years researching the employee experience and its effects on employee engagement in order to improve the Kazoo platform and offer valuable takeaways for teams of all sizes and industries. And Tiffany has been with Kazoo since 2015 and has supported a wide range of customers during her tenure. She specializes in customers who are looking to refresh their employee engagement experience and enjoys taking a consultative, strategic approach to building world-class company culture. So Tiffany, Skylar, thank you both so much for being here today. I'll now pass things over to you.
All right, thanks so much, Michelle. Hi, everybody. Skylar here, sitting right next to Tiffany. Like Michelle said, this is really a passion project for us here at Kazoo. I get to research this all the time, but also sort of, consult with our customers and see what's working and what's not, and turn that into some valuable insights. So hopefully we've got some of those in here today. And sitting next to me is Tiffany, who's kind of a celebrity around here. We work with hundreds of organizations, and she sort of had her hands in some way on almost all of them, launching their engagement programs and sort of helping consult, make those even better day to day. So really excited to be sitting next to her. Hi, Tiffany.
Hi, thanks, Skylar, and welcome everyone to the call.
All right, a lot to get into. So let's jump in. Just as an overview, before we really get into some of the advice today, we want to cover some of the challenges that we see and the research proves out that a lot of engagement programs seem to be facing. Then we want to combine that with what actually works, again, based on our work over the years with hundreds of organizations, but also kind of what the research seems to be proving out on the engagement side, especially recently. And there's a lot of ways to optimize these programs, but today, if nothing else, we'd love to really zero in on three of them, that if nothing else, those are kind of the biggest levers that we've found and the research seems to be proving out. That if you pull those levers, you'll see sort of the best bang for your buck in terms of putting yourself on the path at least to a best-in-class engagement program. And then hopefully at the end, like Michelle said, if you've got any questions, we'd love to sit and chat with you for a bit. All right. So again, right from the top, looking at the really common challenges that we see facing engagement programs. The first one right here, just we can talk to this for a second. It seems sort of straightforward, I would hope, but adoption. We all are sort of investing in these more and more. I'd be really surprised if anyone on the line is sort of not doing anything when it comes to engagement programs these days. But probably what we've all seen is we've been burned by investing in a program or a certain technology, and it maybe starts strong, you see good engagement out the gate, but then the engagement numbers, the participation numbers just sort of fall off on the program. Adoption, seems to fall off. So if you're out there and you're comparing programs or you're looking at technologies that might help, everyone has good intentions here, but really the best philosophy or the best technology, it sort of means nothing, right? If employees aren't actually using it, they're not participating in your programs. So that said, with sort of adoption in mind, I'd love to ask you, Tiffany, what are maybe some common mistakes that you're seeing? Like when you sort of, someone comes in and says, help, we need a better program, or we're trying to change this, what should we do?
Yeah, so there are a few things that definitely come to mind as some trends that we've seen, business over business, industry over industry. First of all, there's inconsistency among departments and locations. And what I mean by that is inconsistent messaging going out. This means that different departments in different locations have a different idea about what their employee engagement's all about. Maybe this means that managers are making the efforts in different ways. Maybe some managers just aren't doing it at all.
Yeah, just to confirm there, do you think it's maybe just not a consideration up front? Like when I'm, rolling out a new engagement program, or if maybe I've invested in a new piece of technology, are we just not considering that there might be some sort of nuances? Maybe if I have multiple locations or even like within departments, does that kind of happen on both of those levels? That seems to be the mistake.
Yeah, I mean, you can just think about it. If you have a different workforce, you're going to have a different experience. So for instance, an email-heavy recognition program is not going to work for someone that works in a manufacturing plant or if they're a deskless worker. You're going to be focused more on mobile stations or screens around the office or even collateral. And then even it could be that employees that are in the field, they may even be missing out.
Yeah, I love it. That's kind of a subtle point, but I've seen you do this and your team do this really effectively, sort of recognizing, again, to lack of a better phrase, like deskless sort of workers. How are they going to engage in these engagement programs or employee recognition programs or some of these pieces of technology that are, a lot easier to get involved in and a lot easier to adopt if I have access to a computer all the time. So you'll really work with those workforces, right, to say, well, what are our opportunities here? And maybe you'll put up collateral, sort of reminding people about it or highlighting pieces of it in high traffic areas of, warehouses or assembly plants, or maybe in other parts of the office you're putting up screens that sort of flash, pieces of the recognition program or, other aspects of the engagement program up there. It seems sort of subtle, but even those sort of low-tech ways of carrying this out are a way of, considering your workforce, considering various departments, right?
Yep, it would make a world of difference.
Yeah.
Another thing, too, to think about when it comes to adoption is just general awareness. This does tie back to some of what we just discussed, is that if your program's not top of mind, then it's possible that it's going to fade into the background.
Yeah, that's great advice. What's maybe some practical or like specific things you've seen companies do maybe to, sort of with this awareness theme in mind or generating awareness across the company?
Well, you really see the most success when there's a little creativity put in there. So, for instance, public shout-outs in a town hall style meeting, or spotlighting someone in an engagement program like newsletters or the intranet. We have a company, Meredith Corporation, that has really great awareness of their program.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically because they have a thought-out, creative, interactive newsletter that they send out once a month. And so people look forward to that. They're excited about it, and it's just a really great way to keep that program top of mind.
I remember that one. I actually worked with them to do a case study, and it did seem unique to me at the time, even though this might seem common sense, but they weren't just sort of sending out those nudges of like, hey, don't forget, we've got this program, you should be using it. Instead of just, little nudge reminders like that, in the newsletter, a place where they knew a lot of people had their eyes, they would, I think, straight up take like a screenshot of things happening within the engagement program technology and sort of feature that, this week as an example of something great. It might have been like a really touching piece of employee recognition that happened, for instance. They would put that in the newsletter, and it was, a great sort of practical way to, again, keep the program itself top of mind, send some reminders, but do it in an organic way. Right? Like, look, these are the sorts of things that are already happening within the program. Keep this in mind. And their engagement numbers were amazing. Yeah. I mean, some of the best we've seen, especially in their industry. And I think year over year, they ended up cutting turnover in half because the engagement program, not to take full credit, but there's a great correlation, right?
Exactly.
An engagement program that a lot of people were adopting with a result like that.
Yeah. And then a couple others to think about, too, is one, you want to make sure that it's resonating with company culture. So you see issues with adoption if they try to make a one-size-fits-all program, but that's just not how these things work. So if you just turn something on and forget about it, then your adoption is going to fade over time. And that's one of the things I'm really proud of that what my team does is that we put a lot of effort into customizing an experience that's going to be unique to your company's culture. And that way the program's going to match the employees' motivations or just really any other thing that's unique to the company itself.
Yeah, you and the customer success team really are amazing at that. Like I said, I'm sitting next to a celebrity, but she's great at that. Again, sort of tailoring these programs to your culture.
And then the last thing to point about with the adoption phase is just usability. If there's too many hoops that you're going to have to jump through to accomplish something like a recognition or a small reward, you're going to lose the steam there. So for instance, if there's a process to send recognition that has to go through, let's say, 3 layers of approval just to get a gift card on someone's desk, that's too much effort. And people are just not going to feel motivated to follow through with that time over time. So we ask people to think through how can we remove some of these barriers to make it a more seamless and efficient experience.
Yeah, I think this is one we see time and time again. One of the most important, especially for this point that we have on the slide about starting strong and then withering away. When we dig into it, it seems like, the perception from the employees is that there wasn't enough reward to have to go through all these sort of manual steps of the program. Like just to tell someone that thank you for a piece of recognition, but me having to, go log it in an anonymous spreadsheet somewhere, get 3 layers of approval for that award to be approved, ultimately for someone to get, possibly a note or a gift card on their desk 3 weeks later. The sort of effort just doesn't match the sort of gratification of it. So it's great that something's in place. We love that people are trying things, but this aspect of sort of usability, like think of it from the employee standpoint. If there's too much, that I have to jump through to get there, ultimately usage just falls off.
Exactly.
Yeah. The second point we have here, like a major challenge, I imagine some heads nodding for this when I see Tiffany's nodding, is leadership buy-in. These programs really mean well. Oftentimes they seem to be, kind of rolled out sometimes as an HR initiative, and leadership maybe hasn't been briefed on them, or for whatever reason just isn't using them, isn't modeling themselves. And on the employee standpoint, like we have up here, if they don't trust the messenger, if they don't believe that this actually is a priority for the company, then they don't trust the message, and the program just ultimately fails.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, there's also three common themes we see in leadership buy-in. One, there's no champion at the business. If you don't have a committee or even a person in charge to spearhead this initiative, it's going to lose steam again and it's going to fall apart. There's also accountability. Is there anything being done to follow up with your team members that aren't fully adopted or using this experience? And then lastly, if there's no business case, then you're going to have a hard time tying those bottom line numbers to the program, and that's going to affect your leadership buy-in as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So keep those points in mind for this particular challenge, because we're going to dig into this one more in the later slides. And if you have any questions about that, or you've run into this kind of frustration, let us know, because we'd be happy to try to answer that today or follow up with you. And then the last major challenge that we have up here is this notion that we call fragmentation. And unfortunately, when we talk about engagement, it's really become, in some ways, a buzzword, right? We don't talk about engagement the same way today as we did 5 or so years ago. And part of the problem is that so many sort of products and technologies and approaches here are being done in the name of engagement, but just covering sort of one aspect of it. So, if we're out shopping for survey tools, all the survey tools are saying, well, you're getting feedback from your employees, you're allowing their voice to be heard, so therefore engagement. Or if we're just thinking about our engagement efforts in general, if we're doing things like discounts in a catalog of potential rewards, oh, that's engagement. We upping our benefits and perks. We're doing happy hours and events, investing in stuff like that. If you've got a wellness program sort of running off to the side, if you've got an employee rewards program, an employee recognition program, a lot of us have learning and development. If we're looking into feedback, performance management, all these things cover some aspect of what motivates employees, what ultimately engages them. But oftentimes, especially when we get to talk to companies, they're sort of happening in silos, I guess.
Yeah.
They're not thought of as one, cohesive engagement program, so to speak. They're sort of operating on their own. So it's great that you have a book club, but if only those, same 10 people are participating in it, right? It's not creating the aspect of engagement that you probably wanted. Same thing with wellness. A lot of us might be frustrated that we do so much to promote wellness, but it's kind of the same small percentage of employees that actually participate, right? Are there any sort of other common mistakes when it comes to sort of thinking about all these different programs or efforts that, tie to engagement, but maybe we're not thinking about it that way?
Yeah, the biggest thing is going to be clarity in your vision. What do you want a better employee experience to look like at your company? But more importantly, how are you going to go about measuring that? So I talk to a lot of customers who say, hey, we're doing a lot for employees. We give them lunch. We give them learning and development opportunities. We throw them events. So why is our engagement so low? And I go back to them and I say, do you have a clear understanding of your goals? Because implementing a piece of technology isn't just going to solve your problems. You need to take a more holistic approach. So when you're having those conversations, it really is all about putting those efforts towards one or a group of overall goals and not having them just wasting time in a budget-wasting silo.
Yeah, I think you touched on it. That's kind of a realization for some of these teams that we talk to, is that we got feedback where we see a need or we see something reflected in our engagement scores. So it's almost like a check-the-box exercise, right? Well, we need something that, deals with engagement. So we go out and we shop for one and we purchase that piece of technology or implement that program, and we sort of put a check mark the day it launches. But like you said, maybe that launch wasn't tied to, certain metrics that we want to improve, or it's sort of narrowly focused just on a couple metrics and not a lot of things sort of tied to engagement.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that said, we sort of covered those three major challenges to try to summarize three sort of themes that we see for companies that we work with and companies that are the focus of a lot of this recent research. So we'd love to ask everyone in the audience today, like, given those three major challenges, what's the biggest one in your mind that your engagement program might be facing? Adoption, again, leadership buy-in, or this notion of fragmentation? Give a second for people to be able to respond to that. Wow, fragmentation, really surprised as a leader right now. Around a third of people saying leadership buy-in. And it looks like maybe people doing okay with adoption. That's kind of surprising. Okay, great. So keep those in mind. The sort of holistic need of all of these programs, or this way of approaching engagement, working together, and the importance of leadership buy-in, because we'd love to start diving into what the research says actually works, how to sort of help these programs. And I'm putting up a slide now that relates to some efforts that we've done here at Kazoo recently. When we distilled down a lot of the research that Gallup has done worldwide, but also in the United States, those companies like Deloitte, really almost any major research foundation and research we can get our hands on, we also went out and did some major surveys of, I think it was just over 3,000 employees in the U.S. workforce, but digging into what actually works when it comes to these programs, or what are the aspects of these cultures that are sparking really great employee experiences. And when we boiled all that down, we found what we call these 10 culture building blocks. And I won't read all 10. You can sort of see them on the screen, but you can see them dealing with these notions of, like, the employee having a sense of pride for what the company does and stands for, having great relationships with both my team and managers, and things like regular feedback and appreciation on my day-to-day work. Instead of a feature set for a program or a piece of technology related to our engagement program, take a second and think, are the features of my program or some piece of technology that I'm using relating to these sort of higher level culture building blocks? Because these building blocks, if present in the culture and if present in the engagement program, are tied to what seems to be motivating employees, what seems to be having them respond in a way that they say, yes, I'm having an excellent employee experience. So keep those in mind. We'll also be sending some takeaway materials after the webinar today, in addition to the slides, if you want more information on the culture building blocks or more ways to sort of think about this stuff. And when we really dig into the survey results that we were seeing, some companies were doing great, others had very poor employee experiences. And when we lump those results together, we really are big on actually building these programs. We've got this sort of building metaphor on the screen. You saw the construction workers on the last slide. Here's sort of like the foundation of a house, right? The lowest category being this baseline structure. So these are companies that are, maybe just doing benefits and perks, and maybe had a philosophy of, hey, providing certain basics for my employees, and they're getting a paycheck every week. Isn't that enough? The notion of engagement might seem like something fluffy or nice to have when times are a little better that we might invest in or think about more. But in this baseline structure, it's really only that benefits and perks line, as you can see on the screen, kind of covered, but everything else hasn't been thought of yet, or the employees don't think that those are sort of covered or a part of the engagement program. And so the bad news is 85% of the employees we talked to that had this sort of baseline structure for their program said that they're having a negative employee experience. So, you can only imagine the direct ties a negative employee experience means on the engagement levels that they were seeing, and therefore things like a lot of stats that affect the bottom line, right? Turnover, productivity, everything's sort of linked there. So.
Yeah, and thankfully we don't see a lot of companies coming to us at this point in the game. Word is getting out, but it is definitely something to make sure that we know about, is like, what is the baseline there?
Yeah, I would say that's even a big change since 5 or 6 years ago when we started, right? Which is amazing to hear, because again, word seems to be getting out that we should sort of be thinking about this. This next structure, again, now instead of the foundation, you've got structure built out a little more. We call it sort of from baseline to better. We've got things like benefits and perks covered, and now we're really starting to dig into and try to make efforts in our engagement programs towards aspects of those 10 culture building blocks, right? And even though that's happening, I've still got maybe a lack of leadership involvement in the program. Core values aren't being exhibited in the program or by employees and leadership. Relationships are suffering because we're not maybe having the best kind of one-on-ones and things like that. So the good news for a better structure is that you've got about 4 times more people saying they're having a positive employee experience. But the bad news is that even at 4 times more people, it's still around 60%. So 40% of people still aren't really having a good time. To me, it still kind of sounds like a failing grade because, again, you can imagine the bottom line impact that people having a negative employee experience is having sort of everywhere else all over the company. Tiffany, I imagine when you talk to a lot of companies, they might be sort of in this structure here, right? They're not kind of worst case scenario, but we're doing some things, we're just not seeing results, right?
Yeah, this is really the bulk of the customers that come to us at Kazoo. This is where they are right now. And so this is a good place to be when you're really looking to start building your employee engagement experience, because what we do is we'll work with you as to where you are and where you plan to go, and then provide you those consultative measures and strategic approaches to take you from this better to optimized.
Optimized, yeah. Speaking of that, this is where we're trying to get, right? This is sort of the point of what we're talking about today, having a best-in-class engagement program that creates one of these great cultures that also gives you a lot of the bottom line benefits of the program working. And here you're sort of firing on all cylinders, right? Benefits and perks are covered. We're thinking about, the features of this program in terms of those 10 culture building blocks, but leadership's also involved, core values being exhibited and modeled across the company, probably with help of the engagement program, and relationships are improving. Could be with stuff like frequent one-on-ones or other ways that are being exhibited, possibly through recognition, performance management, other aspects where the program can help again. So again, baseline, better, optimize, but how do we get to sort of this view you see on screen right now, where 95% of employees, when they had all these boxes covered, said that they had a positive employee experience. That's phenomenal, right? Can you imagine working at a company where that's the case? And that's, when you see some of those companies featured in the headlines of, this company did this for its culture and engagement program, and now seeing, I think the latest stat from Harvard Business Review is they're seeing about 4 times better returns than the S&P 500. So when you have this sort of investment in, the employee experience, pretty incredible. So on our way to getting there, if we're maybe at a sort of a better structure and we'd love to get to optimize, there's 3 factors that we can focus on that we found in our research, and again, distilling down some of the others' research. If you're focusing only on these 3 areas, they're kind of the biggest levers that you can pull to see, again, kind of the biggest bang for your buck and put yourself on a path pretty quickly towards optimization. Leadership, appreciation, and growth. And to dive into each of these, leadership first, I've got a stat on the screen here, but speaking of leaders, I think it was Gallup. Yeah, I have it on screen. Gallup recently did a State of the American Manager report, and they found that managers alone, manager involvement, just that one factor swings engagement scores by up to 70%, which is pretty crazy. I mean, we talk about rolling this out from an HR standpoint, trying to get adoption, but sometimes managers are this sort of forgotten layer of rolling these things out. But they have that much impact on, these programs and any engagement effort kind of really being effective, right? In our own research too, we saw that 91% of employees had a positive employee experience when the leaders of the company, they model, sort of the best use of these programs and the core values of the company. When employees said that they didn't see that from their leaders, that number fell to 47%. So just this one factor swung it from 47% to 91%, the number of people saying they had a positive employee experience at the company. So this topic of leadership, I know it can be a sore subject, especially for maybe the managers that you talk to, Tiffany. You got to see this all the time. HR knows that, culture might be suffering or that they want these programs to succeed, that the company's made an investment in them, but they're just not seeing the leadership involvement. What should they do? What advice do you typically sort of give to people in this situation?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to recap, we talked about lack of buy-in, and so not having a champion or not having that business case to really be some of those common mistakes that we see here. So, again, talking through having that committee that's going to hold the leadership team accountable, and then also being able to tie those bottom line numbers. So, because a lot of people leaders, they tend to be more why-driven, and they're going to want to see the stats that are going to prove the ROI on this. So having those values available, using some technologies like reports that are built into some of your platforms will help provide that why as well. So yeah, talking about the committee, really getting leaders to follow this mantra of be that change that you want to see. For example, on our team here at Kazoo, one of our market development managers, he's constantly recognizing his team. So this makes me, as a people manager, want to step up my game in our employee engagement program, because not only is he really setting the standard for people managers, but his team is always not only just meeting their goals, but exceeding them. And they're most engaged in our platform too. So to me, there's that direct correlation between his buy-in and his team's success as well.
I love that. I know exactly the manager that you're talking about and whose team you're talking about. And yeah, that's such a great way to think about it, right? Instead of sort of nudging certain managers or top leadership of, hey, don't forget we invested in this program to do this, why aren't you using it? That might work on some. All they need is that sort of gentle reminder. But for others, you can really supply that sort of why by pulling out, proof points from right here within the company. Like Tiffany said, she looked at the usage of the program from this one leader, saw that he's one of the most involved in the program, sort of using all the features of it, and it, oh, what a coincidence, happens to coincide with when we looked at sort of our own metrics and analytics reports. His team has some of the most engaged employees across the whole company on it. Like, that's the sort of, snippet that you can pull out to show directly, like, look, this is what we're trying to do, and the people who are doing it this way are seeing results. That can really help sort of people get off the fence and make this not seem just like another thing that I have to, do or allocate time for.
Yeah, and because one of the great things too is, our studies have shown that people will repeat the behaviors in which they've been recognized for, and so our manager that's constantly using our platform, he's always recognizing when his team is ahead of meeting goal or they have exceeded their goal, and they're continuously exceeding their goals. It's really easy to see that direct correlation there.
Right.
And then the next thing, too, we talked about was the creating accountability. So, if you start, basically if you're going to start following up on the managers that aren't using the program, someone does need to be there to hold people accountable, because if it's not used, then there's no value.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of your day-to-day, and I feel like you try to help companies do this if they're not already. You might set up sort of a reoccurring, maybe manager check-in or manager training even to sort of address this. So in some ways it could be, hey, don't forget about this thing. You might just have been saying you're too busy to use it. But maybe some people just need a refresher course on this is in place. Here's sort of how to use it effectively. Here's some results we're seeing across the company if you do. Sort of easier to make that business case for it, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically, if you're wanting to hold people accountable, come from a place of curiosity. Some people may resonate with that call out if they're really competitive, but others may not. So ask questions about why aren't you using our employee engagement platform? Maybe they're not aware of it, or maybe they're unsure how to get started. But you can really just start by asking some probing questions about why they're not bought in. And this is also, too, where some of that data is going to come into place. For instance, in our Kazoo platform, admins can show managers if they're amongst some of the lowest engaged, and then they can start the conversation to understand the why. So it really just does come this human side of recognition, engagement, and culture. And that human side, it just may not always resonate with everyone, including some of our executives that, again, want that bottom line. So bottom line metrics like retention to help drive the point home, or even a simple survey results like ENPS or feedback on managers are going to provide data points on employee satisfaction, happiness, and then other leading indicators that engagement could be.
Yeah, I really can't overstate the value of, if the technology you're using for one of these programs doesn't give it to you automatically, going and finding that somewhere else. Again, maybe if you've done a survey recently and some feedback has come up, or you have some of these anecdotes about teams that are involved in this program and their results, or teams that aren't involved in some of their results. But it really helps with this notion of there's like an awkward conversation, right? If we want to be honest about it. Raising this with a leader or even an executive, trying to not necessarily call them out, but bring up the fact that your participation would be so valuable here, but you're not using it. That could be a hard thing to sort of raise, right? But like Tiffany's saying, having those anecdotes on hand, or if the platform or the engagement program has some reporting, like bringing that data to it, really takes that sort of out of the air, that uncomfortable ask, right? Great. So that's lever number one, leadership. The second one is appreciation. And, we were just talking about leadership. And another Gallup stat that I have here is that when they looked at teams where, managers or people in leadership positions on the team were recognizing the strengths of the people around them, they saw that engagement just on those teams, could double compared to just not doing that one thing in sort of your management task, or not thinking about your appreciation in that way. And another thing, a SHRM study recently, that when recognition at the company, recognition and appreciation, when that was carried out in a way that tied to an organization's values, or if you think about your core values that might be on a wall somewhere or in an onboarding packet or something, when appreciation was tied to core values, 70% of the companies doing that, so that they had a strong return on investment from these engagement programs, especially like the appreciation part of it. And just again, that one factor. So when recognition is not tied to core values, only 38% of companies said that they were seeing a good return on investment. So again, a jump from 38% to 70%, just because they were trying to tie appreciation efforts to organizational values or core values. So we mentioned these two sort of nuances of appreciation, looking at people's strengths or tying them to core values, because it really is that sort of nuance when it comes to this aspect of appreciation. A lot of us are coming at this with great intentions, right? Like a lot of us, especially managers, have an appreciation mindset. We know we should be doing the thank yous and the good jobs, but it seems to be that the way it's carried out, right? There's just like a little bit of a lack of sort of training or awareness for how we should be carrying out or showing that appreciation that is all the difference in this being that major lever that turns it into sort of a best-in-class way of doing appreciation and recognition in these programs, right? Yeah.
And so, there's a few things that come to mind when we're thinking about this appreciation part. Specifically, if you're getting, if you're not doing the recognizing yourself, if you're not taking the time to actually do it, but then hoping someone else will do it on your behalf. That's a common mistake that we see.
Been there.
Also, managers, we talk about appreciation, but if managers are only recognizing their teams but not recognizing across departments, that's something an opportunity to work on as well, because we really want to foster those cross-departmental relationships. And then lastly, this is a big one, is what kind of recognition are you sending? They're, high-level appreciation like thank you or good job, well, that's great. How can we really tie it back to the company goals and mission? So really making that recognition specific, meaningful, and impactful, and sending it in a timely manner.
Yeah, I'd love to zero in on some of those words you just said, for real. If nothing else, from this slide, I think it would help so many people, and we've gone through this training and this exercise of just writing down, I guess, 3 of those words: timely, specific, and meaningful. Because like you said, the thank you and the good job, always appreciate it, right? It's way better than nothing, but it's that little shift in focus or frame of mind for not sending a piece of recognition 3 months later at an all-hands meeting, but it being actually timely, like pretty close on afterwards, as well as specific and meaningful. And I talked about the awkwardness of these situations a little earlier. This is one of the most common questions I think we get is, I want to recognize people, but it feels weird. It not only feels weird for me to sort of go seek you out and kind of corner you in the office and be like, hey, great job on that thing, and then sort of walk away. But that's sometimes like an uncomfortable experience for the person receiving that as well, even though it comes from a great place. But this notion of it being specific is the advice that we give to people. So if that feels like an awkward conversation, think about the day-to-day on your team, for instance. If you have a sort of direct report, there's probably a lot of goals and things that we've agreed on are priorities for us as a team, or maybe priorities even for this individual project. And if I can get specific about something that you did and tie it to the goals for that project, that takes all the awkwardness out of it. Like, why did that person just come and say that to me or send that recognition to me? Just a straw man example, like me thanking Tiffany for some excellent speaker notes that she supplied for the webinar, for instance. It's maybe weird for me to just, come over to her desk and be like, hey, thanks so much for those notes, and walk away. But when we both, acknowledge that, hey, thanks so much for those notes, like, this webinar really means a lot to me. It's a subject that I'm passionate about. So just to see that you're doing that kind of prep, like, means so much. And I think, we're really going to have a great conversation today because of it. But just that one piece of thought into specifically why am I setting this piece of recognition, and maybe tying it to, a priority, a higher goal, again, takes that sort of awkwardness out of it. And if you can reflect that over and over in the appreciation that you're sending, whether it's a note that accompanies a gift card, or if you've got a piece of technology that allows people to send peer-to-peer recognition to each other, that way of framing it, I think, Tiffany, correct me if I'm wrong, but you regularly do manager trainings or when you're rolling out these programs, you'll try to sort of coach that in. And I think that's probably a great piece of advice when thinking about appreciation.
Yeah, I mean, it really all goes back to driving home the impact that this person is making, either to drive the business or even just to make someone's day a little bit better. Everyone wants to know that their work has value and meaning in it, and this is regardless of what their role is. So if you send that recognition and keep that real-time, specific, and meaningful in there, they're going to understand their impact, which is going to help them understand the meaning that they have in their work, which is going to help connect them to their leadership and to their peers. So it really does take everything a full circle. Again, just those three words, timely, specific, and meaningful, has a lot of power. So I always encourage my people leaders when I'm having these conversations is, this is a new habit that you have to form. Keep it on a sticky note by your desk, or just make sure that it's visible to you, so whenever you are sending recognition, you know to tie back to those three keywords.
And if that sounds daunting, this can also be a sensitive subject for some. But I mentioned peer-to-peer recognition earlier. And that's another major recommendation we have when it comes to appreciation, because if we just gave the advice that you heard from us to managers only, because they were the only ones empowered at the company to send appreciation, to create, recognition posts, to write recognition that other people see, it's really hard for them to know the nuances of every project and every team, right? So naturally, I would maybe only be recognizing within my team or department, and I sort of contribute to the siloed nature of it. But guess what? A lot of the people that individual contributors talk to every day, a lot of the cross-departmental talks they have, other people know those nuances of kind of the day-to-day work. And so if you kind of open up the recognition, whatever tool you have, whatever process you have, whatever program you have for the recognition and appreciation side, if you open it up for peer-to-peer, in other words, sort of anyone at the company can recognize, across departments or from bottom up, that's really a super simple way to what we call like democratize recognition at the company. And you'll be able to see this timely, specific, meaningful recognition kind of organically start happening rather than putting all the burden on managers or leaders.
Yeah.
Great. So the last sort of major lever to think about optimizing when it comes to these programs is what we've just summed up as growth. And I have a stat up here on the screen that only 21% of employees are getting feedback that actually motivates them. When we talk about growth, we're talking about these aspects of, how am I being challenged in my job, that deals with both performance management maybe, or the kinds of learning and development that I'm doing learning and development. Probably nothing new for a lot of people listening today. We're investing billions now in learning and development. It's one of the sort of hottest categories of programs to be investing in, even if maybe we're not thinking of it as engagement, even though it is, again, the sort of fragmentation problem. The Association for Talent Development came out with a study pointing out, yes, we are spending billions on this now when it comes to learning and development. Maybe that's something creative you're doing, or maybe it's sort of the online modules that you offer, or another way of doing L&D. But when they really looked at those programs, the overall net promoter score from employees, in other words, like how do employees regard these learning and development programs we have, the average score out there is a -8 net promoter score from employees. So great that we're doing something, but their perception, the usefulness of these learning and development programs just sort of isn't being felt by employees. So kind of challenging the way that we think about growth for the employees. How is performance management sort of involved in being thought of, and what are we getting out of the learning and development options that we're offering? I tend to ask you, Tiffany, for common mistakes here, but I wonder if this one's a little bit different, because maybe growth and performance management, learning and development aren't being thought of as an aspect of these programs at all. I would just sort of love your take on this.
Yeah, I mean, just taking even a step back as a people manager, and if anyone's also the people managers on the phone too, is, for you that success is going to be seeing everyone that reports to you grow and develop and eventually be promoted into something bigger and better, be it ideally in your company or even if it's into another position in another company. It's just all about that professional growth. Because, of course, too, your employees are going to want those opportunities for growth as well. So we see it's a challenge when performance management isn't thought of about engagement, as engagement, but rather just considered like another program or initiative, and more like the, quote, dark side, where it's not as enjoyable, but it's still like a really big piece. So while people often think about the perks, they don't necessarily think about the runway to get there. So how do you think about it as a people manager? How do you foster growth? Do you offer a path? Even if that path isn't necessarily clear, are you paving that way? So help your employees visualize that and let them see how they're contributing to that. And that's where performance management really comes in, especially with things like goals, feedback, check-ins. All of these things with the performance management side are going to lead to more engaged, driven, and ultimately more motivated members of your team.
Yeah, I think that's really hard, right? Because again, when I think of engagement, it's usually associated with the positive side, the rewarding side, the appreciation side. And then we have sort of a separate initiative, or like an end-of-year initiative in some cases, for performance management, performance reviews, performance evaluations. And those are means to an end of, again, evaluating what happened and how we can get better. But it's not necessarily thought of as this should be carried out in a way that ties to employee motivation or like long-term engagement, like people having that positive employee experience. So I think you covered that as kind of one of the major problems when you consult with companies, of just the sort of perception of performance management, learning and development. I'd just love to add that I'm super biased, but I can't overstate the role that technology can play here, and how it can sort of enable all this, because this sounds like a ton of advice. It sounds like a lot of, perhaps blame or responsibilities put on the shoulders of managers and leaders. So in addition to all the stuff that we're doing every single day, how am I supposed to think about all these aspects of, appreciation, modeling core values, having the right kinds of feedback and check-ins and performance management conversations with people? Again, I'm biased because we work for a platform that does this for us, right? But it automatically, in our sort of day-to-day, has those sorts of nudges to, set these goals, to get on the same page as my direct reports with what our individual goals are, what our teams and departments and the company's goals are, to get that kind of alignment. But then those subtle nudges of like, hey, it's been a little bit, where are we when it comes to this goal? Are we ahead of schedule or are we behind schedule? It sort of nudges me to have that sort of check-in and record feedback about it in a way that it's much easier to sort of see that bigger picture, right? Of, okay, I see how all of this is working together. Our performance management conversations, our check-ins as manager and individual contributor, I can compare that and see it working in tandem with the recognition that you're getting as an employee, or other aspects of the engagement program that we either are or aren't participating in. Mm-hmm. So it's less of a sort of mental burden, right? Like when technology can hopefully kind of help us out with this stuff. So however you're recording that, whether you have the greatest set of spreadsheets ever, I'd kind of love to see that, or you know, doing some of these trainings that Tiffany mentioned, that when we come in and consult, we're maybe sort of having those to roll out at a company, or to do ongoing kind of course correction maybe, or again, you know, sort of using a platform to help you. Can't overstate how much burden that sort of reduces, because this can feel like a lot, right? All right, we've covered so much there, and so just to recap, you know, be wary of those common challenges that we talked about. It sounds like a lot of you maybe have some awareness, or are gaining awareness of the sort of fragmentation aspect of could a lot of the programs and efforts that we're doing work better together, rather than being a whole bunch of sort of siloed efforts that hopefully have their own little, you know, boost on engagement and help our overall program. Framing things as the sort of basic, better, or optimized program, where are we at right now, and maybe keeping those in mind in terms of setting a goal for how we want to get better, or just being wary when you talk to others at your company of the risks. If we're sort of in a basic sort of setup right now, if we stay here, you know, we run these sorts of risks, or some of the studies show we have probably a pretty low level of engagement, or we risk having a really low level of engagement. So keep those sort of frameworks in mind of basic, better, or trying to get to optimized, sort of best in class. And then we showed you those 3 levers that if you really dig into those especially, those have the biggest jumps in terms of, if I can correct those aspects of our employee engagement program, they'll have the biggest bang for the buck. And then hopefully later, or at the same time, we can, you know, optimize some of those other areas as well, the 10 building blocks that we showed you. So all that said, we also just wanted to point out that we talked a lot about some of the results that we see sort of using Kazoo day to day, but also some of the consulting we do. Hopefully, as you can tell, we absolutely love talking about this with any and everyone. So if you'd love to see a demo of how we do this stuff, or maybe a setup that shows you, you know, ways that you could fold some of your programs into a platform like ours, just shoot us a yes on this poll, and we'll be happy to follow up and answer any questions you've got. And speaking of Q&A, I feel like we're at that part now.
Yeah. Absolutely. Great presentation, guys. Lots of great questions coming in, plenty of time. So everyone in the audience, please keep them coming. All right, guys, first question here. How can you implement employee engagement on a tight budget?
Do you want me to speak to that? Or?
Yeah, I'd love to hear your take on this.
Well, one of the things, and I kind of come into this conversation with a bit of the Kazoo hat on, so again, I'm a little bit biased, but you know, if you want to reward and recognize, you don't necessarily have to have monetary rewards. I work with a lot of customers that have really tight budgets, and that's where you can get creative. Maybe you can have a CFO or you know, a CEO or someone offer up some time for a mentoring session where people can understand their paths and how they can get there. Or maybe someone's willing to give up a really great parking spot for a week, or you can get a conference room as your office for the week. So there's a lot of options there that you don't necessarily need a lot of money. It's just going to be a matter of being creative and thinking about what is going to resonate with your employees, what really impacts them culturally, and then we'll work with you, or you know, whatever program you choose to go with, to help drive that initiative.
Yeah, I love that. We sort of talk about it as like the non-monetary aspect of it.
The experience aspect.
Right, and that's just a matter of, we mentioned it before, kind of tailoring some of these programs to your unique culture. So it might be the case that a lot of people are motivated by monetary rewards, but there's a lot of wiggle room, especially when you dig into people's motivations of, well, what would, you know, give me some motivation, give me something to work towards in these programs that doesn't necessarily cost me a $100 gift card every time I want to carry that out. So that way of thinking about our unique culture and ways to tap into non-monetary things. Other advice that we give people, and maybe this isn't just top of mind for everyone, I'm surprised, having gone through some of our case studies, is that a lot of times the budget for this sort of stuff is already there, but investing in employee engagement is thought of as sort of an additional cost. Whereas when we started talking to the company, we realized, hey, if you're taking this sort of holistic view and realizing that if we can tie our wellness initiatives, if we can tie our safety initiatives and tie little incentives or awareness things into that, like connect them to these employee engagement efforts, connect them to our engagement program, some of the budget that you were already spending on initiatives to improve safety, or a lot of people are doing ad hoc things where managers have the ability to sort of just reward people, buy a gift card at some point. They have that sort of leeway already in there. When they added those things up, when they added that sort of fragmentation up across the company, it's like, wow, we're already spending sort of way less than what this would have cost to invest in a piece of technology. It's much easier to have that conversation with the finance department. We're already spending this in other areas to try to improve these aspects of engagement. Let's just allocate that budget, to this larger program.
Great, thank you both. And can you talk about where onboarding falls in engagement?
Yeah, I think that as soon as someone is onboarded onto the company, there's a great opportunity to dive into that engagement experience. Really have it be the foundation of what they come to learn and expect within the company. So, for instance, again, I have my Kazoo hat on, but we have and always encourage people to talk about the Kazoo platform on the first day of orientation, and even encourage people to go in and recognize people as soon as they get involved, or even have managers recognize their new team members as soon as they get into the company. So we really strongly encourage, make it a precedent from day one.
Yeah, I can't overstate the importance of the onboarding part, especially if you're not currently thinking about it in terms of engagement. So much research coming out about this right now, but that first day, that first week, even the pre-launch leading up to day one, framing it in terms of how can you create clear expectations in this first day, in this first week, in this first month of what's expected for me, not only in this individual job, but in terms of being an engaged employee here, or in terms of what sort of actions should I take that match the company values. And Kazoo, it's really easy. We point people, like Tiffany said, we give them as part of their orientation, like a walkthrough of the platform itself, and they can see in the activity feed activities happening across the company that are tied to our core values. But if you can reduce that uncertainty about, well, what's expected of me in this role, but what's also expected of me as a contributing employee here who, contributes to that culture, or actually lives out these core values that we might have written somewhere. If you can model that and sort of again show them what clear examples are of that. The onboarding research shows that not only is the engagement going to go up, but you're going to lose a lot of that bad side, which is a lot of people end up, kind of quitting in the first 3 months, especially in high turnover industries.
And really, it's just when you do the onboarding, setting the expectation right off the bat that they are coming into a company who part of your culture is a culture of recognition. So setting that expectation right off the bat, and then again, when you have that leadership buy-in and they're coming in and they're being recognized by their new teammates and by their leadership team, they're going to really know to be, that example has been set, they're going to know to move forward with that as well.
Yep.
All right, thank you. I know we are getting close to the top of the hour, so we're just going to try to squeeze in a couple more questions here. And next question, how do you suggest engaging a manufacturing employee group that does not have an intranet or access to computers?
This is something that we work with a lot over here at Kazoo. I'm smiling because this is just kind of our day-to-day. A couple things with that. One, going back to those kiosks or other opportunities we talked about to inform and educate on the employee engagement experience. Getting creative with how you communicate this messaging out, but this is also really going to be where your manager buy-in is going to be crucial. Because if you're going to have your managers that are going in, that are recognizing, that are doing those performance management activities, there really does become a butterfly effect. As that becomes more of a common just an action from leadership, then people then that are receiving that recognition are going to want to pay it forward. So we really think of it as that butterfly effect, but it just has to start somewhere. And that's why in an industry like that, leadership is going to be key to the success.
Yeah, crazy correlation in those customers of ours where just even the smallest amounts of manager effort pay off so big in terms of those teams or those, sort of warehouses or those kind of delivery teams buying into the program, so to speak. And getting on that phone after the shift to check what was said or what recognition was given or what reward was thrown my way. But having done some case studies here as well, it really is a way of getting creative about if a new piece of technology or a new kind of program isn't always met with quick adoption, and it's, part of it's because we can't access our phones or other technology like on the job. Getting creative about when we do have people's eyes or what is motivating people to take notice. I talked to one team who always did sort of an end-of-year event where, some sort of bonus was given. And what they did the year after they launched Kazoo was kind of do a personal, like a handheld card at the event, like a takeaway. Yeah. And on it was, just a really thoughtful message about, thanking them for everything they've done that year. But on the back were these explicit, really just 3 steps, 1, 2, 3. Hey, your bonus is waiting for you on the Kazoo platform. If you take these steps to log in right now from your phone, and you'll be able to, go access it for the customer awards that company had. And so they knew that people really pay attention to that sort of end-of-year event, that we were going to have everyone sort of gather in one place. And then just that little step of putting the instructions for accessing this program, for interacting with the program, right there on that card at that event, they saw a crazy jump in people, maybe logging in if they hadn't done it in, weeks or so. And some of the, newest drivers, maybe it was their first time logging in at all, but associated with like such a big payoff, right? Like if I can, that thing I was sort of putting off, now that I've figured out how to log into it, there was my sort of end of year kind of bonus or customized reward waiting for me with a piece of recognition. So they just, get creative about opportunities that they do have that people are checking and are paying attention. So sometimes that's something like that card. Sometimes it's putting, screens up in high traffic areas like we mentioned. Sometimes it's actual physical posters and things I've seen Tiffany's team do that, managers can walk before and be like, hey, great job. Here's sort of a physical thing. Later on today, you can go log in if you want and take advantage of this.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. I know, again, we are hitting the top of the hour.